friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have the legendary secret agent, Mr. Peterson, back with us for the third time. So a couple of months ago, I did a video on why school discipline just isn't working, and I got tons of questions about parenting, corporal punishment, what parents can do if they're in the public school systems, homeschooling, just a gamut of really great questions. And I definitely have my opinions. However, Mr. Peterson actually is a parent, so he is going to help us today with all of our questions. But before we get started, Mr. Peterson has some really interesting updates and even some drama that's going on with his school. So do you want to tell us what's going on with you, Mr. Peterson?
I am a tenured teacher. I've been in my district for a number of years. This year, they just out of the blue brought me in and said, yeah, we're cutting your program down to part-time next year. And it is a very clear effort to get rid of me because I am one of the few faculty that I'm aware of that is really going about everything in the right way. You know, I always address issues directly in the office in a peak performance professionalism. Like I don't go around the school, drumming up the war drum support from all the teachers. We're going to storm the office and make a big stink and all that stuff. Like, nope, that's not me. I go directly to the office and I handle all the matters. And because I was in there so often and because it became clear that I was going to insist that the administrators actually administrate, that they actually enumerate and enforce the policies of the campus and the policies of the school board, that really rubbed them the wrong way. They were hard-nosed, hard-line, wanting this, everyone's calling it a new agey style kind of approach to dealing with all the matters on campus, which if we get a chance to talk about it, it's not really new age. It's always been around, but it's always been the weak approach to dealing with matters at hand. But anyway, they're trying to get rid of me. So next year, I am applying at other places and I might get a job somewhere else. It's going to come with a hefty deduction in salary because, for those who don't know, when you go to a different district, they only honor so many years that you've been teaching on that salary schedule. And the number of years that I've been teaching far surpasses what districts are going to what they're going to honor when they hire you. So I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do. I might even just stick around and do the part-time thing and just let them know, like, yeah, you and I are both going to be graced with each other's presence next year. And there is quite a fight in me, just generally speaking, that I like to do just for fun. But, anyway, I have a family. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to go about it. It did turn into a big stink where I was not the only one on the chopping block, when it comes to someone's program. And so there's real shady business going on with the district and the school board and stuff. And so it turned into a big deal where, like, a lot of people are involved now. And I don't want to bore everyone with all the drama, but it's the same thing that we always talk about: all the gaslighting, all of the manipulation, it exists at all levels, all the way up to the administration, superintendent, school board, and beyond, even up to the state. Yeah, that's what's going on.
Thanks for being honest about that. And I think it's important for a lot of people to hear, because a lot of non-teachers, join us on Teacher Therapy, and a lot of them will just say things like, why don't teachers stand up? Why don't they fight? Why don't they say what's true? And unfortunately, even for tenured teachers, there is a very punitive system in place for teachers. As much as they'll say that they don't want to be punitive with children, they will definitely punish teachers, and they'll try to push you out, or they'll try to give you like the worst assignment and just all of these games. And so teachers are just kind of in a perpetual state of fear. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, and we hope the best for you next year.
Yeah, thank you. And for those who are watching, who aren't teachers, who are asking that exact question that you just mentioned, you are witnessing right now, right in front of you, Exhibit A of the teacher who had tenure, who is well established in this district. And I start my class with beginning level students, and usually by the end of the year we're bringing home first place hardware. Like, you're not dealing with some rookie here. You're dealing with someone that is well known in the community, well known in the district, and I pump out high quality stuff reliably and dependably. And that's the result of weak leadership. They want to get all that focus and all that attention and that spotlight off of them when you start saying, no, this is not going to work. And not only is it not working for me as a teacher and the way that I'm being treated, but it's not going to work for your students and your community. You're going to destroy this community with this mindset. And yeah, so there you go. I'm a perfect perfect example of answering that question for people when they say, why don't people speak out? Yeah, that's why.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I'm grateful that there's teachers like yourself that are raising awareness about this issue, because the one thing that districts really seem to listen to is parents and publicity and outcry. So when teachers say stuff, they're like, okay, we can silence one individual, we can squeeze them out of the system. But when parents start getting, becoming more aware of what's really going on, they can actually join and lock arms with teachers and say, this is not what we want. And so speaking of parents, let's go ahead and transition into that topic. So one of the biggest questions that's come up recently is, what can a parent do if their child is, let's say, in a public school that has, these weird modern discipline philosophies and things are just going not so well? What can a parent do? What are some of your thoughts on that, Mr. Peterson?
Man, well, unfortunately, my first answer is get them out. You're in a situation where you have no choice, and I mean, there's just no way possible that you can homeschool or private school or anything like that. I suppose just try to be as involved as possible. Communicate often with the office and with your teachers. There's just so much going against you. There's so much just foul, perverse environment, around your kid. Like, I don't even know really if that would do much good, keeping in touch with the office and your teacher, going to the office often if you hear about things that you don't want your kids surrounded by, which I'm sorry, that's going to be every day. Like, every day your kid's just going to be surrounded in a soup of just degeneration and degradation, and like, not by the teacher, just usually by the student body. I mean, oh my God, at my campus, I just got to share this story. I'm so sorry. I'm walking to the office, or I'm walking to the bathroom or something, and one of the campus security is talking with like a group of other students. Okay, I'll just give you the exact story. So he comes up behind like this group of girls, and he does like this, sneaks behind one of them and says boo, and it's just supposed to be like a fun thing. And the girl turns around, she's like, F you, Ray, or whatever the guy's name was. And it was like this, happy everyone laughing kind of thing. And I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like, wow. It was a story where there is the adult right there, the adult who's the authority on the school ground, and this is how they're talking to each other. Yeah, your kid's going to be around that a lot. So if you hear anything like that, or if you know of anything, I mean, you got to go in there to the office and say, you got to get control of this campus. You have to. You absolutely will not put my child will not be subjected to this. And I wish there was hope. I just don't know if you kind of would put a target on your back, or maybe even on your kid's back now, where the administration is going to say, oh, this is a problem parent now. And, we got to, is this advice helpful at all?
I totally understand that it's really hard. I was kind of wondering if there are certain values that you can instill in your child at home that will kind of prepare them for the environment that they're going into with school, so that in a way they're ready for what they're going to see and they're trained not to give into it. It's kind of like in the olden days, I know we would have programs like DARE that would like teach kids not to do drugs and different things. But I just kind of wonder if there's anything that could be done to really give kids values at home where they can, go into that environment but not have it corrupt them. Any thoughts on that at all?
Definitely. First and foremost, biblical values. And that's, of course, my personal opinion. That will carry a lot. That will get you through a lot of really bad situations. And so, the 10 Commandments, understanding how to discern between, truth and fiction, wickedness and righteousness, that kind of stuff is a really big deal. That's a real good way to kind of navigate through that. I guess I also would mention a lot that, if I take a look at your friends, I'm looking into your future. So they would now they understand that you are what you eat, basically. Like you are the company that you keep. I would teach them to keep their eyes open, and if they're hanging out with a group of people, for a long period of time, let's say maybe 4 or 5 months, and you just start noticing things about them that don't sit with you right, you're looking into your future, like 2 or 3 years down the line, like that, you're going to be like that, or you're going to be dealing with the stuff that they're dealing with. I'm talking more long term, like they're going to be, dealing with, the criminal justice system or something when they get older, which is what you're going to be dealing with if you continue on that way. And I'm very pleased with all my kids' friends. They seem, they seem like perfectly fine people. So
I'm actually so glad that you mentioned that, because at least as a teacher, I would see really, really good kids kind of get mixed up with not so great kids. And I would see those students' attitudes and academics and efforts and just everything fall apart. And so,
amen.
yeah, I think really having parents emphasize like what kind of quality traits are we looking for with friends? What are warning signs? And even though it sounds really cheesy, there was some really, really clear, advice that my parents gave me. They said, don't drink, don't do drugs. They didn't let me just randomly spend the night over people's houses. They knew who was coming over to our house. And so in some ways I was kind of sheltered, but that was actually a really good thing, because basically all the kids in the neighborhood and some of the kids at the schools were into bad things that I just naturally got to skip all of that, because my parents kind of shielded me in a way from even having company with those people. So I think that's really good advice.
I would like to piggyback off what you just mentioned, because I've had several students. One girl I can think about in particular, when she was in, I don't know, third or fourth grade, and this girl was just a little sweetheart, man. Like, she was just the nicest thing, and she was always enthusiastic, doing her work, attentive, all that stuff. And now she's in, at the grade level that I'm teaching at now, and she's just a nightmare. And it's got to be, her parents were perfectly reasonable people. Like, you would think by all counts and all measures everything would have worked out great, but it's the people she's around. That's what it is. I'm sure there's probably a heavy influence of TikTok and all kinds of other stuff that she's involved in too, which doesn't help. If I were giving other parents advice, pay very close attention to who your kids are around. And it sucks because at school they're there for the majority of their functional day, and so that's what you're going to be combating.
Definitely. I'm also glad that you brought up social media. Do you have any kind of social media policies with your kids?
There's none. There's none. Like, the only time that they're involved with YouTube or anything like that is when we're doing it together. Now mine are still pretty young. I have a 6-year-old twin boys and a 10-year-old girl. Yeah, everything we do, we pretty much do together. There is no scenario ever in my house where there's just kids sitting on a couch with their face staring into some screen, for 2 and 3 hours at a time, which it's different than a lot of other families now. I go over to other people's houses and I walk in. I don't judge anybody over it, but I walk in their house. They got 2 or 3 kids, every one of them sitting on the couch. They all have a phone or an iPad in their face, and I'll be doing something over there and I'll walk back in the room an hour later. It's the same exact picture. And that's just so, so dangerous. Oh my God, I can't explain how like you're just handing over your authoritative control to whatever might be showing up on that screen. And that is, once that seed gets planted, that is hard to root out. It's a lot more work than anybody's going to want to deal with. So I would very, very highly recommend against that.
Definitely. And a few people asked me about academics because, the academics is kind of questionable in certain places. And so they asked, if I want my student to be at or above grade level, what are some things that I can do with my kids at home? Do you have any ideas about that?
If they're young, you're definitely going to want to be heavily part of that process, doing their homework with them, reading to them a lot. And by young, I mean probably, between age 4 and maybe 8 or 9. You're going to want them to think you are the beacon of wisdom and light and the authority in this matter. And I mean, yes, you're going to be partnering with their teachers, but I personally want my kids to think mom and dad are the ones to go to for answers. The teacher is just there giving the content. And not that I have anything against their quote unquote teachers, which is us, because we homeschool. But if they were in school, it'd be like that. For older kids, I mean, I guess you just have to, you got to get those routines and that discipline down early, where they on their own kind of understand the value of learning, as opposed to the way it is in school now, where learning is supposed to be a quote unquote fun thing. I think my own children understand that the part about learning that's fun is when you can apply it and make your life easier in many ways.
That's great. And something else that I recommend for parents is you can simply Google what things should a 5th grader know. And there's so many homeschooling websites that they'll give you lists broken down by each and every subject. That way you can talk to your kid when they come home and ask them what they're doing in math and science and reading. And the beautiful thing about the age of technology is there's tutorial videos on absolutely everything these days. they're not super proficient with whatever subject they're doing, you can work with them online and help them find resources. So that's something else I would recommend for parents.
Yeah, another thing too is, and this kind of sounds counterintuitive, but try not to be like neurotic as well about everything your child is learning. Like they're in this race, to see how fast your child's developing. And the way that humans function for the first, I don't know, 98% of our existence, 98% of our existence was, you just kind of picked up everything little by little in the home. And by the time you were a young adult, you had a pretty good grasp on how everything worked, and there wasn't so much of a hardcore systematic approach to everything. Not that I'm against that, but Googling stuff, finding out what a fifth grader should know, all of that's great. And at the same time, remember, just let your child kind of pick up stuff at their pace when they can. And if you're reading something that says, okay, well, kindergartners should know these 19 things, and they only know 10 or 11 of them, don't freak out. Just let it come when it does. Spend your quality time with your kids. Don't make it a fun activity, but just make it wholesome. Make it a time when you're with your child and you're just kind of slowly, deliberately, and kind of let the child on their own intuition and their own kind of processing speed and everything happen when it does. And that's when they'll really kind of get the real meat and potatoes joy out of understanding stuff.
Definitely. So I'm curious, we've both worked with both older and younger students. I taught between 4th and 8th grade, and I know that you've taught basically every grade. What are some values and just even manners that you saw growing up that kids don't have today? Because I'm thinking if we can kind of isolate those can be some things that parents are actually teaching their kids, whereas before they naturally picked them up with culture and society.
Yeah. What I've seen most often lately is kids are really into turning around halfway through your sentence and walking away from you. And I say, let's try that again, because I don't know if other people speak to you that way, but I don't talk to the backs of people's heads. And I tell them, I was like, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in typical conversation, most people look at each other and you can kind of tell when the conversation's coming to a close. You can hear the end of the sentence. Both people seem to be resolved in whatever we were discussing. And then you turn around and walk away. When you're talking to me, I don't turn around and walk away from you. I don't turn my head and start, focusing my attention on other stuff. And that's coming to a stop right now. So at the beginning of the year, that went on for a good, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks. And finally, all my students figured out, no, if I walk away, he's just going to straight up call me out right here in front of everyone. He's not just going to, Peterson's not just going to keep talking to you while you're walking toward the door or something. That's something that I've noticed most often. And that's like, it's just like we were talking about before. The students think that they're running the show now. Like, okay, I'm done listening to you. I'm going to walk away and poof, magic trick. This problem is just going to disappear. And I'm like, nope. That ain't going to happen. And another one is a lot of foul language. I mean, just very casually and liberally just thrown out in class, like students talking to me right at my desk and just throwing out F words, SH words. I mean, and they're just talking to you like, okay, well, this is, I don't know why it crosses their mind. They're like, Peterson's just going to sit here and keep talking to me. We're just going to keep talking about this subject or something. And I'm like, I'll just tell them, I was like, look, I don't know. I know this is something you guys are used to. It doesn't really surprise me what I'm hearing, but I won't tolerate it. And, they kind of gripe and hem and haw about it for a little bit, like, oh, Peterson's just this, square dork who's just not going to let me talk like this. I'm like, no.
Definitely. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I had so many conversations with students about all of those things, because a lot of times, they would want to just kind of have their head to the side and be rolling their, eyes and just all of the body language. And I would be like, wait, we're going to pause. I need you to sit up straight. I need your head to be straight. I need your eyes looking at me. And we would actually break down all of the little things. And I would find as a teacher at the beginning of the year, sometimes we would do role playing. And even in the educational world, they have something called looks like, sounds like. So they would be like, what does respect look like? What does it sound like? But as we've been talking about in other videos, there's a massive push away from that, because so many people these days just kind of have this idea that any attempt to have manners and class and dignity and social structures is somehow equal to complete oppression. I don't buy into that at all. So as parents, you may not be able to rely on the fact that your school is helping with that, but you can start to practice with your kids. What does respect look like and sound like? And even kind of as a fun thing, when they're not in trouble and when they're not acting crazy, you could role play, like, what does it look like? What does disrespectful body language look like? What does a disrespectful tone of voice sound like? That way they can kind of practice and know the difference. And sometimes when I was a teacher, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But a lot of times I would talk to kids and say, would you talk to your mom like that? And most of the time they would actually say no. And then we might have this conversation of why. And, but people think, a lot of these kids think they can talk to teachers however they want. They think that teachers are like the bottom gum on their shoe. And so I think it does make a big difference to actually stop, students, whether you're a parent or teacher, and say, this is not acceptable.
Yeah. And my warning to teachers would be, all of the stuff that we're talking about is definitely true. And you can throw all that right out the window if you don't conduct yourself in that same professional manner. If I walk in your room and you're sitting at your desk and you're playing with your phone, you're screwed. There's no chance. And I mean, this is not groundbreaking information. Like, this is just straight up practice what you preach. And if you're talking to your kids and it's not, at the peak level professional manner, then yeah, you're just making everything harder for everyone.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up too, because I think something that we can gain from this generation of parents that old generations didn't always have is actually apologizing to kids when you're wrong. I think in the older generations, it just didn't happen. But I do think there are some redemptive qualities of newer forms of parenting, and just saying, you know what, I did not model for you respectful behavior, respectful speech. I apologize. Will you forgive me? I think that makes a huge difference for kids. It even happened to me a few times in the classroom. I felt like I did not speak in like a kind tone at all. And, it did make a big difference, for the kids to hear that. A lot of parents told me that they want to support their teacher, but they're not entirely sure how. Is there anything that you could recommend to parents that want to be supportive of their teachers? What kind of things can they say to teachers at the beginning of the year? How can they behave if the teacher calls them? What are some of your ideas?
Well, I'll bring up one tactic that I use that seems to work pretty well. I'll call them right in the middle of class. If a student is openly, waging battle with me publicly, then I just walk up to my phone. I say, okay, come on up. And they're like, what do you mean, come on up? I was like, I'm calling mom. And they're like, you're not going to call my mom. And I was like, here we go. Dialing, and I'll dial the phone and I'll say, I'm going to hand the phone to you, and it's your chance to say your side of the story before we get started. And usually the students refuse. They think they're just going to, call my bluff or something, and I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I hand the phone to them, and if they don't take it, then I'll talk to mom or dad on the phone. And 75% of the time, maybe, the parent will rip them a new one right there, and they'll sit back down and they'll pay attention and they'll keep quiet and stuff. And so if a parent were talking to me at the beginning of the year, I would just say, can I call you in the middle of class if I need to, and hand the phone to you. And, a lot of parents will be like, yeah, go ahead. And the times that it doesn't work, or so if there's no answer or whatnot, then I'll try to escalate it to the office, which of course, as we all know, really does nothing. But I think that'd be probably the most helpful thing they could do.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned that, because a lot of people liken the example of like parents and teachers to kind of like a marriage, like when kids know that mom is soft and dad is strict, and they always go and ask mom to create an argument between, mom and dad. And so it's kind of the same way with like teachers and parents. Like if the kids know that the mom's going to freak out and like eat the teacher alive, then those are some of the most kind of entitled, emboldened, brazen, misbehaving kids that you will ever have in a classroom, because they know there's literally nothing that they can do, that will result in them getting any kind of like consequence. So I would encourage parents to have a united front with the teacher, knowing full well that you can investigate, you can ask questions. If you need to have a sit-down meeting with the teacher and the principal, you can do anything that you need to do to make sure that everything is okay. But you don't want to let your kid know that you don't like the teacher, because, oh my goodness, I've had so many kids say, well, my mama don't like you. And so it's like, you don't even realize sometimes as parents that like kids are picking up on things that you say at the dinner table. If you say the school is so stupid, the teachers are such idiots, the kid is really, kind of taken all of that in. And so if you can speak with honor about the teaching profession, about educators, if you could actively have conversations with your kids about being respectful to teachers. And I would even tell them, as a parent, say, I need your job to behave respectfully, and you let me be the one to fight your battles for you if it needs to happen. Because too much today, kids have this mindset that, oh, I'm going to fight the teacher and take her on myself or him on myself. And that's what's creating so much of the mayhem in classrooms, because naturally kids are short-sighted. They don't always understand rules. Sometimes they don't see the big picture. They're self-absorbed and they're only thinking about their own needs and wants. And so I think kids have to be explicitly taught, to be like honoring to your authority, and will work through anything that needs to get worked through.
Yeah. And for the teachers listening, if you, especially the new teachers, if you do call and you find yourself in this kind of scenario where the parent is partnering with their child against you, at least know that you're having on record of the phone call being made, because that's the only thing administrators really care about, apparently, is that you're following this, this order of operations of getting in touch with the parent. And then now the office's hands are tied where now they have to do something, because they love to do that whole, well, did you call the parent? And if you didn't call the parent, we don't care if the kid threw something in your room or, cussed you out. You have to take care of that first, which is also kind of ridiculous. But yeah, if you do call and you end up getting in some kind of combat with the parent, that's actually a plus for you when it does reach the office.
So true. So we've kind of covered a lot of really important things so far. We've talked about teaching kids values, looking at your children's friends and making sure that they're not with the wrong crowd. We talked about supplementing your kids' academics by looking at what they need to learn and helping them at home. But the thing that all of this rises and falls over is what consequences are going to happen if the kids don't do that. A long time ago, with an old school like discipline book, I basically read that the number one question any kid has when you give them a rule is, or what? Yep. What will you do if I don't do what you tell me to do? And so, as we've talked about before, the modern school's answer to that is we're going to have a conversation about your feelings. Now, you have a lot more leverage as parents at home about what you're going to do. And so, in a video I did a couple of months ago, there's been like a hot debate in the comment section about corporal punishment. Now, when it comes to schools, corporal punishment is something as simple as having a kid write lines. It could be doing laps. It could be doing community service. And then there's the more traditional kind of corporal punishment, which would be paddling. And as we mentioned before, that actually is legal in 19 states. And a lot of times it kind of requires like a parental signature for that to happen. But of course, when you're at home, that can look different. You have a creative variety of consequences. So I just want you to give me some of your thoughts on the issue of corporal punishment.
I'd love to. Okay, so when schools like to use corporal punishment, they like to gaslight you with this whole very broad term of writing sentences or making them, run a lap or something. So I don't call that corporal punishment. I just call that a regular penalty or something. So now when it comes to my own children, yes, I did spank my kids. And, when they were young, I would, one of the kids would hit someone else or whatnot. And I want to emphasize that when I did it, I was never visually angry, when I was in the midst of it. Even if I was angry at the time, I would say, okay, that's going to get a spanking. I'd leave the room for a couple minutes and I'd come back and I'd say, okay, it's time, and I'd sit them down and I'd spank them 3 or 4 times or whatnot. You hug them and you explain. And it would every single time would turn into a conversation where, there's obviously the relationship connection there. And you had to do it, if I had to count, maybe 10 times at most, with each of my kids. And now never had to do it again. And yes, it's emotionally painful, but it's necessary. And now all of my children know that, if you're going to make the choice to actually hurt somebody or do something really bad, it's going to come with that consequence, and it's going to be swift and appropriate. And me personally, I would not ever really feel comfortable spanking someone else's child, even if there was a parent signature. I'm just not down with that. I don't know why. It's just a real kind of cringy feeling I get. It's just not my place. So I'm not down with spanking in the schools. I could totally see why it happened 100 years ago. I mean, there was a very, very tight-knit community in most schools 100 years ago. And parents would say they wouldn't even have to get permission. Everyone just knew, yeah, that you act up in class, the teacher's going to whoop you. And 100 years ago, we had a lot more things going really well for us, compared to today. But corporal punishment, which now I'm saying with big old bunny ear quotes, corporal punishment in the school definitely needs to be brought back if we're talking about the writing of sentences, the walk in the park, detention, Saturday school, work detail, all of these things absolutely has to be brought back, because just like you said, children are going to say, this is the rule or what. And I'm sorry to break it to everyone, it's not just children. Everybody asks that question when someone says, you're not allowed to do this. Oh yeah, well, what's going to happen if I do? I mean, even if you don't outright say it, that's the very, very first thing that's going to come into everyone's mind when they're given a restriction. And, the old term, rules were made to be broken, which I never really liked that way of looking at it, but it really is true. The rules are made because you are expecting at one point someone's going to break it. And the rules that are made are 1,000% worthless if there isn't enforcement. If I'm reminded of an old Seinfeld episode, which is like one of my favorite things he brought up, and he was at the airport and he had a reservation for a rental car, and he got there and they didn't have the car for him, and he's like, yeah, but I made a reservation, and they said, oh, we understand that, sir. And he's like, I don't think you do, because it's the part about keeping the car that makes the reservation a reservation. If I get here and the car's ready for me, then you actually, whoa, wouldn't you think you actually reserved the car? That's the reservation. That's the same concept behind rules, right? If you made the rule, and if the rule's broken, you have to enforce it. And if you don't enforce it, then take your rule and go throw it in the trash can. That's the part of the rule that makes it a rule, is if you can actually maintain the fact that it's a rule over a long period of time. If I were relating the spanking or the corporal punishment of my own children to how it applies in the classroom, the administration and the push today, the modern push today, is to make everything about relationships. And that's true. The relationships between teachers and students are very important. But there's the reason why the term, you do the crime, you do the time exists. The penalty has to happen first. It must happen first. If you're going to spank your child and you spend 2 or 3 weeks explaining all of the reasons why you love that child, and all, you go into the deep annals of their history and all that stuff, it's not really it's not going to compute correctly if you wait all that time and then the penalty finally comes much later. It just doesn't make sense. The penalty must come first. And then during that reflective period is when you start getting into all of the details about what happened. And if a school, I mean, God forbid, if a school ever actually had detention, right now it would be more like you go to detention, they'd sit in a room and there'd be some iPad that they'd be playing on, and there'd be a fleet of counselors, like talking to them the whole time, and it'd be like this whole lovey-dovey hug a thug kind of process where there's no actual penalty really happening. And I'm like, no, you sit them in a room for an hour staring at a wall, no phone, no book, no nothing. Yeah, they're gonna start reflecting. Even if it's something if they're not reflecting on the stuff you want them to be reflecting on, there's gonna be something going on. And to the point where at bare minimum, they're not gonna want to do it again. I mean, most adults don't want to sit in a room for an hour staring at a wall. I mean, that's hard for anyone to do. So yeah, it's gonna have an impact on a child. And then after that happens, you can, after the detention is over, then you can talk to them and you can start doing the restorative work that everyone wants to talk about. That help?
You brought up so many great points. One of the things that I like that you said is you only had to administer spankings 10 times or less for your kids, and they're doing great now. So the whole point behind having an actual consequence that's unpleasant, whatever it is that you have to use it less and less, because they know, okay, if I choose to refuse to do what I'm supposed to do, there's going to be an unpleasant consequence that I'm going to remember. And so that part of the deterrent is just knowing that it exists. And I think it's so hard, for a lot of modern kids, because they have no concept that their actions actually yield consequences that are negative. Because the most that they ever get is just a lot of talking and a lot of explaining. And I think something else that a lot of modern people don't acknowledge for whatever reason is that there's going to be a huge subset of kids that are only motivated by a punishment, just hands down. That's kind of human nature. You can have some really sensitive kids that a conversation would work with them, and you never even have to graduate to the, the more intense means, because they actually listen and do what they're supposed to do. There's going to be a certain subset of kids that are like, okay, if you give me candy, all right, I'll do what you're asking. But then there's going to be that final subset of kids, who knows what the percentage is, that's like, I don't care about candy, I don't care about talking to you, I don't care about the greater good of the community, but if I know that there's going to be discomfort at the end of my consequence, I'm going to stop doing it. And it was just really interesting to read a lot of the comments, because a lot of people told stories of how it took them a couple of years of, getting, whether it was spankings or whether it was getting grounded or detention, for it to finally set in, because the goal is ultimately that people have an internalized moral system, not that, they turn into criminals. Because a lot of the people that are arguing on the other side of any kind of corporal punishment say essentially that, oh, that's just going to create angry criminals. But it's kind of the exact opposite. And something that I just like to point out to people is, since the dawn of time, corporal punishment has existed all around the world. Corporal punishment has existed. It's just kind of been within maybe the last 100 years where people have got rid of the idea of having negative consequences. So just for fun, I found some ancient proverbs that I think you guys will find really interesting to listen to. So some of these might sound kind of familiar. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." Proverbs 22:15 says, "Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him." And we have Proverbs 29:15, which says, "A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother." And all we have to do is look at the news. It's so sad to see how many children are disgracing their mothers by their behaviors, by their decisions. And it's just, it's hard to think about, for a lot of people, but if there possibly would have been loving, kind, relationship-based discipline in their young years, it may never have escalated to the point that it's gotten to today.
Yeah, and you actually did a really good video a while back ago. I can't remember what the name of it wasn't even a study. It was kind of like a treatise of what the guy who talked about the different forms of
Kohlberg's theory of moral development.
Boom, that's it. And so just like we said, yeah, you are going to have some kids that just they just get it when they're young. And that's a very, very small minority that just understand internally the morality of how things work. Because again, what I've heard a lot from these kind of sanctimonious blowhards that come in for these workshops, and talk about all of like how wonderful every child is. And no, the true case, the nature of mankind is not is not altruistic and moral. The nature of mankind is opportunistic and greedy and sinful. We're out of control basically from the moment we're born, and that has to be very little by little whittled down into disciplined to the point where you can function well in society.
Yeah, and I think I can't reiterate enough, like, it doesn't have to be paddling or spanking if you don't want it to be. It has to be something that is uncomfortable enough to be a deterrent. And I just can't help but laugh thinking back to my teen years, because I think the older you get, the less parents have leverage. But I do remember one time my mom threatened to throw away all of my makeup, and I was bawling and crying and begging, like, "Mom, please, no." And it's kind of funny to think about now, but it's just like, there's got to be something that gets in touch with something that a child doesn't want in order for it to be considered an actual negative consequence. Anything else is a game. And, for those that don't know, more likely than not, the kid is just playing the adult. And I've mentioned this before, but I think that's another big problem with the conversation-based form of, if you even want to call that discipline, is that I just feel like kids learn to be master manipulators. They learn to say what adults want to hear. They learn to be sneakier with their misbehavior, all the while, like, there's nothing inside of them that's saying I shouldn't do this because this thing that I don't want to happen is going to happen. And I think, a lot of people have mentioned it in the comment section, but I think that's why bullying is really out of control in a lot of schools, is because the kids know, okay, I can do whatever I want to somebody else. And the most that's going to happen is maybe we sit down and we talk it out, only for the same stuff to happen. And for the kid that's the victim of the bullying, a lot of times they just get threatened, like, you better not go to, the principal or the teacher anymore, or it's going to get worse. And it's just completely out of control.
Yeah, the most beautiful comparison that I've heard about the disciplining of a child is, I'm going to kind of, in a clumsy way, try to remember all of it, but it's imagine you have a large piece of granite and you're trying to make a sculpture, and a child is a sculpture or a painting that takes 18 to 20 years to do. And I'm talking about your own personal children now, which can be related to the school, but let's just talk about your own personal children. So your own child is a painting or a sculpture that takes decades to make, and when you get done with it, you get to step back and you get to see now the sculpture that you made, and that's you get to observe that. And as you're doing it, like little by little, when you're working with granite, you just chip off here and there, small little adjustments. And this is all the small discipline methods you use as they're getting older. Some areas, like when you're chipping around the neck, or maybe you're doing something with the arm, you have to hit a little harder. You have to get deeper in. And if you do it the wrong way, if you slam a hammer into the granite, you're going to get a big old chunk out, which is going to be a scar that never goes away. It's there permanently. And you're not going to really see that until 20 years later. So you have to be cognizant of all this stuff while you're doing it. A master sculptor knows just exactly where here and there, to do all these little corrections and things. And so you want to be able to do it without having, if you're spanking and you're doing it and you're angry, or you're doing it out of proportion, you're going to leave these big scars that either take a lot of repair later on to fix, or that remain with the child forever. And that's something you have to deal with as the sculptor later on, knowing that it's a result of your actions. But if you do it well, and all of us, every single person is going to make all kinds of really bad mistakes as a parent. There's no way out of that. You will have big scars in your sculpture, when you're older, but that's just because no one's perfect. But keeping this in mind, that's what I'm always doing in the classroom, where I'm disciplining someone, and I'm trying to keep that in the back of my mind. Like, I'm going to do as best I can to little by little whittle this down. But in some cases, if you're working on a certain part of the sculpture, that has a big curve or something, you have to hit that a little harder, and that's when the penalty comes in. That's when the punitive element, gets introduced, because sometimes it's absolutely necessary, or you're going to be stuck 20 years later with a sculpture that just looks like a lump of clay, just looks like a slug or something. And, you're not going to want to see that as a parent. And of course, the sculpted creation, your child isn't going to look like that, and they're going to turn around and say, well, why did you do this to me? Why did you make me look like this after 20 years? Why do I look like this, ugly, just molded mound? And so that's the delicate balance that we all walk as parents and as teachers. And teachers, usually your sculpture lasts 1 year. You only get to isolate one small area of that child. But that's the beauty and the artistic nature of teaching, is that you get to, you specialize in this area. And ideally, all the parents in the community are going to recognize that and say, I know this teacher, when they get done, let's say we're talking about, I don't know, maybe your job is to do the shoulders, of this sculpture. Like, this teacher makes those shoulders really well. And so, yeah.
I love that. That's actually similar to another analogy that I've used before. And it's that a sharp object in the hands of a surgeon saves a life, but a sharp object in the hands of a killer takes a life. And so I think the temptation in our modern society is to say, oh, there's some killers that have used sharp objects to kill people, therefore nobody can have sharp objects. But then that would take away the very, mechanism to heal people. And so in the same way, there's no question that people have used corporal punishment in ways that are abusive and harmful, just like your analogy. They did it out of anger. They did it out of like an unhealthy sense of revenge. And there's no doubt about that. But there are millions upon millions, not to mention civilizations worth of people that have used some kind of corporal punishment in order to help mold the future generations to go on to greatness. And so I think the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what are the consequences of completely taking real consequences off the table? Like, it's what we see now. Even if you just look on YouTube, like classrooms out of control, it's just horrifying. I mean, there's videos upon videos of students like beating up teachers, fighting each other. I mean, even it's been on the news, people that have taken their own life over, fights of them getting broadcasted on TikTok and things. And it's so out of control. And to me, that's an actual consequence of removing negative consequences in life, in the classroom, at home. And so I would just really encourage like anybody that's kind of on the fence. Like, I want to say again, you don't have to spank your kids. That doesn't have to be it, but you really do have to figure out and tap into something that is going to make a difference in your kid's life. For a lot of young people today, it's having a cell phone. You could say, okay, we're taking away the cell phone. We're taking away something, that's really going to hurt. It's got to hurt in order for it to be an effective deterrent. And so I think that's just the part that we've lost today in society.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, and speaking of all those videos where you're dealing with, fights in class, or it could really even just be a kid just, being really disrespectful to you. It's hands down, it's just not what, professional adults should be subjected to. I mean, yes, it's going to happen a couple times because that's part of the profession. Is you are going to have a small percentage of students that are not raised to act in the proper way, and that there should be an escalated program that involves you in the office to make sure that we can stop that as soon as possible. But this madness and mayhem that is sweeping the nation, it's just no one should be subjected to it. Adults, the other students in the room, that has to be stopped. And like, I was having a discussion the other day with, forget it, I'll just say it. So we were talking to the members of the school board, a handful of teachers. And the topic kept coming up like, well, we need to reward the good students. And they're like, yeah, we don't have rewards for the good students and all. And everyone keeps bringing that up. And I say, yeah, that rewarding good students is fine, but it's all an empty gesture if you don't get your campus under control. What is a bad student going to be more willing to abuse? Like, are they going to stop? I mean, if they get the sense in their mind that they can just tell any adult to F off, or that they can start running the school, are they going to give that up for once a month ice cream? Are you guys really thinking this? Like, it's just put the same scenario into an adult. If you could just tell a cop to get bent every time they pull you over, for speeding, and nothing's going to happen to you, are you going to give that up for like, once a month for a couple, free taco coupons at Taco Bell? Like, no. Like, of course you're going to be more willing to abuse the system of people who have restrictions over you. It all ties back to this unhealthy obsession to developing and maintaining relationships with the students, which already sounds cringy enough as it is. But this unhealthy obsession to do that is dragging your whole school down. It's sinking your ship.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, how horrible are we setting up these students for real life relationships if they're taught that, oh, you can like cuss somebody out, you can disregard their feelings, their wishes, you can run roughshod over all their boundaries, and they're just supposed to sit and smile at you and pat you on the back, and like nothing's going to happen. Like, that in and of itself is a disaster, because real relationships are built on mutuality and mutual respect and mutual boundaries. And so it's pretty rough. What are some of the problems that you think that you see with modern parenting that didn't happen in former generations?
Absent. Yeah, the parents might be physically there, but they're maybe involved. Well, I'll give my experience when I was a kid. I'd come home from school and my mom or my dad would be doing something with me. If I got home, like, let's say 3:30, and maybe you're eating dinner around 7 or 8, and then you're starting to wrap up the day. Between 3:30 and 7, at least half that time I was doing something with one of my parents. On most days, I would take a guess. I haven't been in a lot of people's homes observing this stuff, but if I had to take a guess, students are coming home and they might say hello, talk a little bit with their mom or their dad. And then for the most part, they're kind of just free range chickens, until time to eat and go to sleep.
Yeah, I've seen that extreme. And then the other weird extreme that I think is much more common in this generation is the parent making their kid their best friend. And you can just tell, like, it's so awkward, like having parent teacher conferences and like seeing certain people engage, because it's like, there's no parent here in this situation. They're acting like peers, which then it's not surprising that, you know, peers typically want to team up against the teacher or against the authority figure. So I'm like, oh, okay, they're trying to be like cool mom or, you know, cool dad. And in that process, the kid is lacking any kind of parental authority at home. So naturally, when they come to school, they're like, what's authority? Like, what's somebody telling me to like sit down in a certain chair? Like, what is this phenomenon? Like, I don't know. And so I would say that's definitely something to think about for sure.
Yeah. And I would say when I first started teaching, which was a while ago, you know, in the early 2000s, I would see more often maybe the overbearing parent like that. I don't see that anymore. You know, that's all gone. Like, yeah, that was a problem having the overbearing parent. Like, you'd meet them and you'd be like, okay, whoa, step back for a second. It's not that bad, you know, and they'd be like, you're grounded for 2 months or whatever. You know, I'm like, okay, well, hang on, you know. Yeah, so like you said, the one extreme of being totally absent, which unfortunately I would say now is probably not that extreme. I think it's probably happening more often. I think it's becoming the norm to have parents be absent, but also, yeah, just like you mentioned, the parent that wants to be their friend, that is not a good idea at all.
Yeah, that just reminded me, I think that they have like 3 names for those parents. There's the authoritarian one, which is the one that's like way, you know, over punishing kids. There's the permissive parent that's like, you know, you're my best friend, do whatever you want, or free range chicken. And then there's the one that we want to be, which is authoritative, which means you're kind, but you also have boundaries and rules and structures and consequences. And so that should be the one that, you know, hopefully that parents are working toward.
You know, in meetings also, I hear a lot of this where, and even on like, you know, a lot of comments on videos like yours and a bunch of others where people are always saying, well, the problem is the parents and the problem is the school boards and all this other stuff. And that is halfway true. Well, I should say that is most of the time true. But what I was trying to explain to other people is, on a school campus, you are always going to have a wide breadth of different experiences from parents and home lives and all that stuff. That's always going to be there. You're going to have really good parents. You're going to have really you're going to have really bad parents. You're going to have a lot of parents that are in between. And it doesn't really matter. The school is supposed to be the gatekeeper of like what conduct and behavior is. And so whatever the experience of everyone else has at home, there's got to be a place where the buck stops, you know, and that really does come down to the administration. I mean, the teachers have an obligation to maintain basic discipline in the classroom. You know, I can handle, a couple things getting out of control here and there with little tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. But when something crosses a boundary, I mean, there's got to be a place where the buck stops. And it can't be this whole long drawn out 7-8 month process where they're telling you they're getting to the root of the problem and all this other nonsense where it's just, I mean, you're just not doing your job. That's what it is. You have a policy, you have a campus policy, you have a school board policy, and you're just not doing it. Or even better, oh my God. So this year I was in the office again, bringing all this stuff up. It's like November or December, like we're well into the year, and I'm talking to the person, I think it's the assistant principal. I don't really know exactly what their title is, but they're basically like the discipline. For people who don't know, usually the assistant principal is the one who handles all the discipline, and the main principal handles all the high level administrative stuff. So whoever was the discipline person, I'm talking to this guy. And he's just like, okay, well, we're working it out. We're gonna put together and make it happen. And I'm like, what? You're saying you don't have a plan yet? Like we're in December or we're in November now. I was like, you don't have an actual enumerated plan for everyone. I mean, I'm assuming there's a handbook at the beginning of the year. Like, and he's just like, yeah, we're working it out. Just hang tight. We're gonna get on it. And now we're like, now we're in April, and nope, that certainly was a lie. Like I guess you're captain of this big ship and you're just kind of winging it, and that is not going to work. Like you just can't put this stuff together. I am not a participant in this experiment of you guys that you guys are putting together. Like I am not going to be the guy who's just enduring this buffer zone where we're trying out all this hogwash nonsense database research. It's crap. It's just total crap. And like I was absolutely, I had never been on a campus before where something wasn't like concrete and like from what I recall, there's always been in some form like an assembly or something at the beginning of the year where all this stuff is laid out for the students who maybe, the parents didn't go over the handbook or they don't know how, the policies and procedures and how a school works. Like there was always something, at least even if it was just the first day of school where all the teachers were going over, their classroom rules and the policies of the campus and stuff like that. Just didn't happen at all at this school, on this campus. And I'm sure it's the same in most places across the country. Like go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that I think that that's the problem with a lot of this modern discipline is it's so subjective that they want to say, well, there's no 1, 2, 3, and here's the consequences for each. They want to say, well, it depends on the kid. It depends on their home situation. It depends on their intentions. There's all of these, it depends. And that's another thing that doesn't really work for kids. They need to know, if you fight, if you're caught bullying, if you're having overt, aggressive defiance towards your teacher, this is exactly what's going to happen. And then that line really can't move. And so, and I mean, I know that this is something that a lot of people have typed in the comments. They're saying that this is like an overcorrection from like zero tolerance times where you would get kicked out of school or this, that, or the other. But I would have to ask again, like which is worse, like keeping kids that are committed to fighting and destroying classrooms in the building for the rest of the year, or not allowing those kind of students to be in the room. I don't see how it's better to keep those kind of students in the learning environment that don't want to be there and are committed to bringing destruction wherever they go.
And the people who don't apply zero tolerance policies properly are the administrators. Like, yeah, zero tolerance is a great idea. You get caught with drugs on campus, there should be an absolutely zero tolerance policy for that. But if a kid had drugs planted in his backpack, well, then obviously that doesn't apply, right? But administrators think they're fixing the problem when they say, well, if you get in a fight, you're kicked out no matter what. Zero tolerance policy. Well, if a kid was jumped and beat up, that's not a fight, right? And so they're trying to turn around and tell us teachers well, zero tolerance policies don't work because you guys think if two people get in a fight, they should be kicked out. I'm like, no one is suggesting that. Obviously you're going to have to do a little investigation to figure out what actually happened. And the person who, attacked another student, you apply the zero tolerance policy to that person. So if I could give any advice to other teachers, this is just things that I've heard over my career. If you hear any of these statements, a giant alarm should be going off in your head. So if you're ever in the office talking about something that has to do with discipline or, detention or whatnot, and you hear an administrator say, such and such is backed up by research, or data-driven research has shown blah, 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 which is always some mysterious unnamed research project that never gets produced, right? If you hear those words, you're being toyed with, because I can guarantee you there is no research that has successfully shown that the elimination of punishment or the elimination of penalty has resulted in anything positive on that campus. So don't ever believe any of that nonsense. Okay, so number 2, if you hear anyone maybe in staff meetings or school board meetings or something we need to get more resources and more counseling services. My guess would be actually you need less resources and less counseling services, and you just need more rubber hits the road actual penalty. If you want to direct any of your energy or resources towards something, it would be hiring detention officers or somebody like that who's going to sit in a room and make sure that the campus policy and the school board policy is carried out. That's where the time and energy should be going. Usually when they say we need more counseling services, is code for hiring a fleet of more counselors who are going to bring kids in and talk about their feelings and have them fill out reflection forms and commitment documents and all kinds of other stuff that never goes anywhere and is never followed up on. And if it is followed up on, they're never going to tell you, the teacher, unless you pester the office over and over again and actually get some information. So if you hear that term, or if you hear those words, we need more resources and counseling, red alarm, red alert should be going off in your head.
Yeah, and I just add to that really quick. If the counselors were actually holding kids accountable and saying your behavior is wrong, it's unacceptable, truly getting through to the kids, that'd be one thing. But my overwhelming experience has been, for whatever odd reason, they pretty much just empathize with the kid, let the kid throw up about how much the teacher is so unfair and they don't like them. And I see kids leaving empowered in their rebellion against authority, not leaving in with any kind of sense of, wow, like what I'm doing really is wrong. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Continue.
Amen to that. And then the last one that's come up quite a bit in the last couple of years is whenever you're having, you know, these issues going on in class, they'll say, well, maybe we just need to get you more professional development. That's their favorite term. Or yeah, the professional development. Maybe we just need to figure out how you're screwed up, you know, and how you're the one who's bothered by this outrageous level of defiance and disrespect. So like another one, they're trying to solve this widespread glaring issue of defiance with training me on instructional strategies, you know, or asking you know, or they're asking how we're using our instructional time. Like, oh, okay, so if I, you know, so again, we had some, you know, sanctimonious blowhard coming in for one of these workshops. You know, they're saying, well, you know, just have a bunch of Skittles, you know, and if you need to get your if you need to get your kids in certain groups, just pass out a bunch of Skittles and say, okay, all the green Skittles go to this corner, all the red Skittles go to this corner, all the yellow Skittles go to this corner. These are instructional strategies. Hooray, you see, you're moving things much faster. I'm like, no, that's not solving the problem of the kid telling me to F off in my class. It's not going to be fixed with me saving a couple seconds on the way that I'm having students organize in a room. There's another one I hear all the time. If you're in faculty meetings and every single faculty meeting that opens up is the administrator saying, okay, what's going well on campus? You know, and you're there is always stunning silence, right? For like a good 10 seconds where no one's saying anything, to the point where now, you know, now someone's got to bring up some, you know, some story about their personal life that's going well that has nothing to do with the school. And there is always the absence of asking the question, what's going not well, what's going badly? I want to hear all the things that, you know, that you guys are struggling with that we can actually fix. Nope, that's never part of the discussion. So if you're in staff meetings or faculty meetings and you're hearing the words what's going well, and you hear that 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks in a row, red alarm in your head should be going off. So
absolutely,
my humble experience and advice for all of you out there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this has been a really great conversation with Mr. Peterson. As always, you're always welcome back. And if you have any questions for Mr. Peterson, feel free to type them in the comment section and he can answer any questions that you might have. And if anybody is interested in talking with me, just tell me in the comment section and we'll see if we can bring you on for an interview. And as always, if you have any video ideas or topic requests, let me know in the comment section. So we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.